guys in the dark.
As I was turning 9, I'm 17 years old now, I started to get coughing, wheezing, and started to eat a lot less, so I was pretty ill. They got me to the hospital. The doctors did some tests for allergies and some other stuff that I don't really remember, but they noticed something. I have strange spots on my lips, like those brown ones on the rest of their body, but they are black. They told me that it was nothing to worry about. Told me that I just needed some more tests done. I got those done, and they found out that I had a small intestine, which was dying, and was going to burst, and probably kill me. So I got an operation. Afterwards, doctors came to ask me if I had any pain prior to the operation. Never felt anything except for really hard cramps. No dying pains whatsoever. Now I have to go to a checkup every single year. A few years later, I was in the hospital once again. Always fully sedated. I really don't remember anything. But I guess they stick a camera in my exit and creating man tears. I wake up afterwards, and there is a doctor there. Tells me that they removed a very big but flat polyp. The removal had caused a perforation in the intestine. Right after the doctor leaves, I get a really bad pain. It grows worse. So they gave me some morphine. Made me get a scan. It revealed nothing. They sent me home and told me to man up. I tried, but I couldn't. About a day later, I was at the ER, where they discovered a perforation and started to give meds and painkillers. Then suddenly it happened. I drifted away in conscious and unconsciousness because of the painkillers, so I thought. I started to see and feel things that didn't belong. Strange figures appearing at my bed. I saw a figure that was dressed in hospital clothing. It had no face, just some skin. I had asked my girlfriend who was standing next to her. She didn't know what I was talking about. About a week later, I go home. Enjoy being outside because I haven't been out in a week. Went to bed early, but things got worse. I woke up around 3 a.m. Threw up blood, enormous amounts of it. I rushed to the ER. I really don't remember anything after waking up till the next morning. My body was in shock. Most of the times I was unconscious. The doctors told my parents I wouldn't have made it if I had stayed half an hour longer in my bed, fighting this nausea, especially because of the amount of blood that I lost. I do remember within that time the same figures, but it got even stranger. They started talking to me. I don't remember everything that was said. One of them I remember clearly. "Come with us. We are ready for you." I wasn't afraid. It was kind of how they talked, though. I refused. I was struggling to stay. There was this man, tall, dark hair, smiling at me. He turned around and left through the door. Later I found out the guy next to me had died, and when I asked to describe him, they described the man that I saw. That next day, this all stopped, and I could go home a week later. I think I came close. Another encounter, March 2010. I got my routine colonoscopy and endoscopy. After my checkup, I end up in a room pretty woozy. Love that. Everything was fine. I needed an x-ray and echo of some organs. Nothing that I wasn't used to. Next morning I wake up. I see food. After about 2 days of not eating, I was definitely hungry. I know that I cannot eat that much after what has just happened. I eat a sandwich. That's it. I started to feel funny, so that I called the nurse. She couldn't tell what was wrong with me. They called my doctor. Everything is fine. They are just light cramps, he assured me. Then went home. Came back an hour later with a lot of pain, shitting blood and whatnot. I got a room, put me up for an endoscopy. Asked for some light sedative to put me in a twilight state. I really do hate endos. They took a look, saw that there was a small wound of a removed polyp that had started bleeding. It wasn't anything to worry about. I couldn't eat for a week. and I had to stay there. After that, they gave me a wheelchair, put me outside in the hallway to be taken to a room. That's when things started to get pretty weird. Felt like I had been there a whole day, fading in and out of the world. Because of the light sedative, I guess. I started to see things once again. A few faces that looked familiar. I couldn't think of where I have met them. Some were upset. Others seemed pretty friendly. Then I saw this guy, just standing there in a doorway a few feet away from where I was. Looking at him, I recognized him right away. I started to cry. It was my granddad who had died years before. He came over, grabbed me by the shoulders, and then looked me in the eyes. He knelt down before me and smiled at me. I was just sitting there crying. It lasted for minutes. He then stood up, turned around, walked away. I could feel myself zoning out again. The nurse that came up to my room asked me why I was crying. I couldn't tell. To this day, I can still feel his hands on my shoulders and see his eyes very clearly. I feel like he protects me from all evil. I was working 11 to 7 shift. As a charge nurse, there was a patient named Sam. Sam had to come in after a mugger had attacked him with a tire iron. The doctors saved his life by removing the left side of his skull and part of his brain. His head looked like a baseball that was deflated on one side. Even though he was not able to really take care of himself, he could read, watch TV. He could even enjoy his favorite pastime, watching the young female nurses and aides. He wouldn't do anything but put his arm around a girl's shoulder to say thank you when she picked him up for his dinner tray. That was it. So Sam became the nurse's home mascot. But as it happens in this business, Sam died of a blood infection months after I started here. The night of his death, we started gathering around the desk for the report from Sandy, the 3 to 11 nurse, as she gave a report to me and 3 nurses' aides. When Sandy came to Sam's name, she said Sam died at about 3:30 this after. Suddenly a call light came on. Everyone stared at the light board. The call was coming from room 30. That room had been locked ever since the relatives had taken the belongings away. The call was coming from his empty room, which was locked. We all went down the hall to see what this was about. We thought that another patient had gotten into the room, maybe put the call bell on. His room was open. Lights were all on. Call bell was pushed in. Only one issue. There was nobody up. The door was not forced. It was unlocked. All the stuff were at the desk. The only one that had the key was the charge nurse, and the door was locked when I made rounds not more than 10 minutes later. I mumbled about it being a loose wire. I twisted the call bell off, turned the lights off, locked the door again, and went with the rest of the staff back to the station. Sandy started the report once again. She didn't get more than 3 minutes into it when the call light came on once again. We went to go find the room opened. Lights were on. Call bell was on. All patients were in the bed. I turned the call bell off. I turned the lights off. Locked the room up once again. Went back to the desk. Everything started up again. The light suddenly came back on. This time it was a more nuisance than scary. We left it on, continued the report so that the other shift could leave. After the report, I went to the room. I turned off everything, replaced the old cord with a new call bell cord, turned off all the lights, and then locked the door. The bell stayed off, but the signal on the board stayed on. We went down the longest hall, which was Sam's hall, to start our shift. As we passed Sam's room, the door was open, but the lights were off. The nurse's aide felt a cold breeze up their skirts. I went into the room to check if someone had opened up a window. Nothing was open. No air conditioner was on in the room either. I closed the door and locked it again. We continued on. After we finished down the hall, we went past Sam's room again. The door was still closed, and it was locked. By the time we finished the first round, it was already past 2 a.m. Back at the desk, the call light in Sam's room was off. We forgot all about it. We drank our old coffee. did my paperwork. The aides exchanged small talk. Around 4 a.m., we started the second round down the hall. This time the door was open, and females felt an even colder breeze. I went into the room. It was like a vacuum, as if the air had been sucked out. I opened the windows. No cold air could dispel the vacuum. I had enough. I yelled, "Sam, you're dead. You spent enough time in this place. Go!" I closed the windows, locked the door once again, joined the aides for the rounds. I didn't go into that room until around 6 a.m. All four of us went for one last look. No vacuum, no breeze. Sun was shining through the window. Nothing to prove anything happened that morning. We didn't want to tell the next shift and risk the whole day looking at ink blots, so we kept everything to ourselves. But this was only the beginning. We were not prepared for what was going to happen next. The following night, I got a call at home from Sandy. She asked if anything happened between my shifts. I said, "Why?" Sandy stated this tale. We were picking up dinner trays. We were one tray over. We passed out 26, and we picked up 27. "Somebody must have miscounted them," I said. "That may have happened. Only the 27th tray was outside of Sam's room, just as he had left it when he was alive, exactly as he would leave it." "Somebody is pulling a prank on you," I said. "I don't think so, because when I stood up, I took the tray. I felt an arm around my shoulder, just like he would have put it. I was the only one down that hall at the time." I then told her what happened the night before. She said, "Well, it looks like we have a ghost to add to the census." A week later, another patient was admitted to room 30, a retired university professor. Her light came on. She had seen a man staring at her from right outside of the window. When I asked her what he looked like, she said that he was not normal looking. The left side of his head was deflated. I told her that I would go around the building, see if I could go look for him. The police were called to go look for this guy too. They had found no one. There weren't footprints outside of the window. The grass wasn't disturbed, but I also knew who it was. When I told the aides, they knew who it was as well. Sam was back. Over the years, female patients that were in that room saw Sam staring right through the window. No male patients ever saw him. You see, he liked girls a lot. I left that place some years later, so I don't know how long he stuck around. Those events we experienced or confirmed by various employees and patients. In my career, things like this are relatively common. I really don't know what to make of this, except that we just don't know what happens after death. Maybe some people just want to linger where they felt most comfortable. It's what I think happened with Sam. The very small step-down unit I worked in was having nighttime staffing issues. I agreed to rotate to nights to help them out. It was a 4-bed, newly renovated unit. It was around 3 a.m., and I was watching the monitors, listening to the patients snore. The pencil drawer had slid down. I didn't think anything of it since the hospital was on a very busy avenue, and I thought that it was caused by vibrations from the traffic on the busy road below us. After sliding the drawer back several times, I decided that the drawer had felt it needed to open, so let it be. Several minutes later, I heard a noise in the room. The patient's bathroom door was opening, and a sound of someone pushing an IV pole. Since I did not have clear view of the bathroom, I just thought one of the staff members from the main floor had dashed in to wash their hands. I looked up from my monitor, viewing to see a patient that we recently had in the unit. It was Mrs. G, an older woman who had come in with chest pain, became septic due to a gallbladder issue. She had eventually expired in the unit. Although the hospital itself had been on this site for years, the unit was newly renovated, right down to the tearing down walls and putting up new ones. I heard the patient's bathroom door open, and again I heard the rattling of an IV pole and shuffling feet. I looked up and saw Mrs. G standing there in the middle of the floor, one hand pushing the IV pole, the other hand on top of the pump of the pole. She had stopped walking, turned then and waved, nodded her head, said everything was going to be okay, took a few steps, and then she disappeared. It was quite a sight to see. Shortly after that, Vision, one of the nurses from the floor, came in to see if I needed anything. I told her no, that it was okay, and asked her if she had ever seen a ghost in the hospital. She looked at me, gasped, and then asked, "No, why?" I explained to her what had just happened to me. She said that she would never step foot in that room ever again. Mrs. G was the first patient to die in that unit. She was well liked by all of the staff, and my feeling was that she was watching over all of us. The day shifter came in. I told them my story. They weren't very surprised. Through the years working at various hospitals, I worked as a nurse extern my senior year in nursing school. I heard older nurses telling their stories about ghosts. I thought that they were just burnt out. Yes, there are ghosts in the care facilities as well. They're not seen, their presence is just felt. They leave an energy behind them when they pass. The past couple of years I've been battling with mental illness, and as a result I did a lot of self-harm, and even got to the point where I swallowed pills to kill myself a couple of times. But this is irrelevant. Due to the couple of times that I overdosed, my parents brought me to the hospital, where after being tortured with lots of IVs and medical attention for a couple of days, I was sent to what was basically a mental institution. For the record, this was nothing like you see in movies, but some of the stories that I've heard from the other teenagers that were in there. Before I start, I want to remind everyone that these are not any of my stories, and I'm retelling what was talked about when we had group therapy, and what they said during the times that we had breaks. Names and details have all been changed for privacy. For the first story, the name I'll use is Emma. Emma was quite unique and was super sweet. She was the first person to introduce themselves to me after I was institutionalized for the first time. At first glance, she seemed like she didn't have a care in the world and didn't belong in this place. This was not the case, though. Emma revealed that there were two voices in her head. These voices would argue nonstop and would drive her insane. They would force her to make decisions that she did not want to make. Sleeping was impossible due to how loud the two of them were. She told me that one of the voices was her friend who had killed himself previously. These voices would also tell her evil things, such as to self-harm, end herself, or kill others, and so on. When she was put on the medication to stop them, it only made them angry and made everything much worse. They would tell her things like she wasn't worth it, no one loves her, and that she should just die. It was horrible, and hearing the things that the doctors would tell her to do to cope made me want to cry for her. Doctors can be fucking assholes, especially doctors that work with mental illness. Please never try to put yourself in one of these mental facilities. They are horrible, and it's not a game. These things are very real. But hey, Emma told me that the voices in her head liked me. That's not funny. I'm sorry. I'd like to share a lot more stories, but as I'm writing this, I feel guilty for posting their stories. If people enjoy this, I definitely will share more. But this one was really scary to me. I'll call this girl Callie. Callie was a very hard ass at first glance. And honestly, for the first day, I was scared of her, even though she was a skinny, blonde-haired girl. But her story gives an excuse as to why she'd be scary. Apparently what went down was she was in her home with her mother, her father, and a little brother. An armed man had broken in, ended up murdering both of her parents right in front of her, and her little brother's eyes. She was forced to stay with her aunt, her grandmother, and other family members who always seemed to neglect her because no one wanted to deal with such a mess-up child. When she was living with her uncle, he physically and sexually abused her. For Callie to be able to trust anyone was pretty much impossible. Her pastor ended up stepping in and started to help take care of her. I'm pretty sure when I met her, she was living with her grandmother, but that was a year and a half ago. This experience was life-changing for me because I have never been exposed to such evils of life. It opened up my eyes and changed me. I'm so much more of an accepting person now, and it taught me to never judge a person because you don't know anything that is going on in their life. I'm sharing this because these stories were interesting, and I thought people would enjoy hearing it. I also wanted to share this just to say mental illness is very real, and not a joke. I worked overnight security in one of the largest, best, and oldest hospitals in the United States. My fellow security officers and I all have stories about one building in particular, but the one that I'll tell is the one that has happened to me. The backstory. This hospital was built in the late 1800s. It was the original psychiatric building for this hospital. Now being the late 1800s, not much was known about psychiatric disorders. On top of that, this hospital was known for its medical research. With both of these facts combined, you can infer that some terrible shit has gone down to these misunderstood psych patients in this building. A couple of years before I started working security there, this building had been converted into offices after the newly built part of the hospital dedicated a section for an updated psych ward. Now on to my story. The rounds for that night happened to include said building. At night, this building was empty, due to recently being converted into offices, and the drones who worked there wanting to leave promptly at 1700, if not even earlier. In some of their haste, they left their office doors unlocked, which is a big no-no due to medical information being located in their offices. It was our duty to go to each floor, make sure each door was locked, and if it wasn't, to secure it ourselves. I did an initial sweep of the building to make sure that it was clear. Nobody in the building. Proceeded to do my door checks. The hallways were pretty narrow, so I could check both sides of the hallway doors at once. At the end of this hallway, there were 2 sets of doors you had to go through to reach the final office, which was a dead end. Everything was secure. It was awesome. Time for the next floor. I exited the 2 sets of doors from the dead end office and stood absolute frozen from what I had seen. Every door was open, set perfectly so their own weight couldn't cause them to shut again, and one wheelchair at the end of the said hallway, facing towards the steps. I had heard other security officers outright reject that set of rounds due to strange stuff happening there, but I had laughed it off until that very night had happened. I never took those rounds again. My second story. The oldest children's ICU is currently under construction to be turned into medical labs, so we have to patrol the area. Once again, to make sure that the area happens to be secure, or to report if the contractor or the foreman stayed to plan for the very next day. When patrolling this area, several security officers have reported seeing a single white male child, around the age of 5 to 7 with short brown hair. Think 90s bowl cut. I personally dismissed this myself. This was before the psych ward incident. As a telltale, because, well, it could intend to scare people. Especially me, because I was new at the time. I got that building's patrol one night. The foreman, who stayed late, called security and asked for a security officer to come up, because a kid locked himself in a room, and I don't want him to get hurt with all the open wires in there, or something to that effect. I unlocked the door for him, looked in what only could be a 10 by 8 room for about 10 minutes. There was no kid. Called it in as a false alarm, and then I finished my patrol. Third story. Had a special detail. It was basically babysitting a violent psych patient, along with another security officer. He woke up in the middle of the night, recognized the other officer, and then said hello. He sees me, immediately starts screaming at me not to hurt him. Now I'm a rather large gentleman. I'm probably about 6'3" and about 250 pounds. I try not to make myself too intimidating around psych patients as not to escalate the situation. Well, he keeps on screaming for me not to hurt him, and he says if I promise not to, he'd make something good happen for me. I promised him. It calms him down. Goes back to sleep, and then I forget all about it. The next day I got a permanent set of rounds, and a pretty good promotion. Easily a coincidence, but interesting nonetheless. Fourth story. Fellow security officer had rounds in the aforementioned psych building. Heard a call on the radio in what could only be described as dry throat terror voice. For one officer to back up. As I happened to be close, I responded to his call, letting him know that I was on my way. When I got there, he had his head between his knees, was completely silent, with a shattered chandelier a couple of feet right next to him. Now, before I had experienced the abnormal happenings in this building, I would have just written this off as a testimony of idiocy, but he claimed that something held him in that spot as the chandelier had started swinging wildly until it started to fall. When it started to fall, he was let go and then allowed to move. Scrambled out of the way right before it had hit him. Got him up, I calmed him down, and I took him back to the supervisor. She yelled to one of our other supervisors, almost lost another one, and insert building name here. The other supervisor had laughed, and then said, "Why do you think we send the new guys? You know, I don't even like going over there myself. That guy is my roommate, and hates when I bring up that experience." Verifying death is always sad, but my friend tells the funniest stories about how creepy his first verification of death was. This is not to disrespect anyone. Black humor is a huge part of a doctor's coping strategies. He was on a night shift a few weeks into his first job as a qualified doctor. Got a call from a ward to say a lady had passed away. An expected death, hence he hadn't been called about her before. And could he come verify and do all the paperwork? It's a busy shift with a lot of sick people to see, so he takes several hours to get there. He goes up. They tell him that she's in room 8. The door to room 8 is slightly ajar, and the room is dark. Now, she was in a side room, but most patients were in shared bays of 6 beds, so you get into the habit of not turning lights on. In his nervous haste to make sure that it didn't look like he was nervous, he slipped into the room, armed only with his little pen torch. The window was slightly open, and he swears the blind rattled against the sill as he crept towards the bed, the tiny circle of light from his torch picking out the rumpled white hospital blanket. Only a very slim rise showing where she lay, as she was a tiny old lady, just skin and bones. Finally, the light plays over her face, and he has to bite back a little scream, nearly dropping the torch. For whatever reason, her pose in death is one of a horrified and horrifying snarl. Lips drawn back to bare, like false teeth, the whites of her eyes showing in a fixed blind stare, and both hands up close to her face, curled into claws, slightly overlong nails shining grimly in the small torchlight. Now, to verify a death, the doctor has to listen for a heart and breath sounds for 2 minutes while feeling for a pulse, check for pupil reactions, and check for no response to pain. He flicked the torch dutifully across her flared eyes, forced himself to shuffle close enough to touch, first to check for response to pain, then to settle shaking fingers on her throat, so close to those furiously grinning teeth, to feel for a pulse, to get a stethoscope under the collar of her gown, under the blankets, as he has to lean in even closer, almost nose to nose with her now, unable to draw his gaze away from hers. He has to stand like that for 2 minutes, the seconds crawling away as he stares into that screaming face. He says there's no way that he could have heard a heart or breath sounds, even if she had been alive. All he could hear was his own racing heart in his ears, and a loop in his head. Please don't let her move. Please don't let her move. Oh dear God, please don't move. I was 14, and I'm female. I had to go to a hospital to get my spine fixed. Up until the day before all of this, I was in a wheelchair. I ditched my parents, and I enjoy walking while I could after the surgery. I was free for once in my life. I was wandering around the hospital, looking everywhere for nothing in particular, when suddenly I wandered near my room to see a middle-aged woman passed out on the floor. I got to one of the nearest people to come help me. They called a code blue. Since I was really into anything medical, I knew what a code blue was. I stood in shock as I watched the lady being shocked when I couldn't take it. I was watching some random lady being brought back from the dead. I found the cafeteria, got me a sandwich from the deli, and then sat at an empty seat. A 20-something-year-old man sat down on the table, which I ignored him. He muttered to me that he was very thankful that I happened to find his wife. I flashed him a kind smile and continued eating. He touched my head. This got me creeped out. He said that I happened to have nice hair, and I told him to hold the fuck up. I squeezed his arm until he let go of me. I glared at him. That made him walk away from me. A few minutes happened to pass, and the guy was back with the same sandwich as me. He told me that the setup was not how he imagined our first date. I told him, hold up. You go around with other women while your wife happens to be in the hospital dying. That's it. I'm out of here, dude. I found a group of adults who I happen to know. I told them all about the situation that just happened. My dad was with the group, and they angrily stood up, went after the man, pushing him up against the wall, yelling at him in his face. My father's face turned red at that moment. The guy then tells my dad that he has a pretty girlfriend, referring to me. That pushed me over the line. I snapped at him. I told my dad to step aside. I gave that guy 2 black eyes, a bloody nose. My dad had never been prouder of me in all of his life.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.